So, have you ever just known something was true, like deep in your gut, only for the facts to come out and, well, prove you completely wrong? Or maybe you felt this instant connection with someone while, dismissing it other person almost immediately.
Oh, absolutely. We all have those moments.
Yeah.
And they often point to this powerful, sometimes hidden force in our minds.
Yeah, and that's what we're digging into today, isn't it?
Yeah.
Human bias.
Exactly. And it's crucial to understand this isn't about being inherently good or bad. It's really about the fundamental wiring of our brains.
Right. So in this deep dive, we want to unpack what human bias actually is, how it works.
Its surprising, often kind of subtle impact on our daily lives, on society.
And importantly, how we can become more aware of it, to make more objective decisions.
Precisely. We've been going through this really comprehensive report, Understanding and Mitigating Human Bias.
And what jumped out at me right away was this central paradox. Bias, which we often think of as leading to wrong conclusions, is actually our brain's way of trying to help us navigate, well, a really complex world, acting as these cognitive shortcuts.
That's really the heart of it. At its most basic, human bias is a tendency, inclination, or prejudice toward or against something or someone.
An inclination.
And these inclinations, they often start forming incredibly early in life. They're shaped quite deeply by our upbringing, societal conditioning, the social environments we're exposed to.
So it's not usually something we consciously choose to adopt, like, I think I'll be biased today.
No, far from it. The report really stresses this essential cognitive shortcut function. I mean, think about it. Our brains are just constantly bombarded with information.
Totally overwhelming.
Right. We simply cannot evaluate every single detail, every single scenario when we're forming an opinion or making a decision. It's impossible.
We just freeze.
Exactly. So to manage that sheer volume, the brain relies on these mental shortcuts. They allow for quicker decisions.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Efficiency.
Efficiency is key. But, and this is the crucial trade-off, this prioritization of speed and efficiency, while it's adaptive, helpful in many situations, it inherently involves a trade-off with accuracy.
Okay. Speed versus being right.
Precisely. So while these shortcuts are super efficient, they can also lead to those inaccurate or unreasonable conclusions you mentioned earlier. This fundamental efficiency-accuracy trade-off really explains why biases are just, well, an integral part of how humans think.
And what makes it even trickier, I gather, is that some biases we kind of know we have, but others are completely hidden from us, operating in the background.
That's a critical distinction, yeah. Biases exist along this spectrum, from conscious or explicit forms that we're aware of to unconscious or implicit ones. And the report really highlights these implicit biases. It describes them as fast, unconscious, emotive, and automatic responses, often relying on pattern recognition.
Fast, automatic. Sounds hard to catch.
It is. What's fascinating and often quite frustrating is that these unconscious biases are particularly challenging to acknowledge and control. Why? Well, precisely because they operate beneath our conscious radar.
So basically, we all have them, whether we realize it or not. It's not a question of if, but more how much and what kind.
Absolutely. The presence of bias is universal. The report states everyone has some degree of bias. It seems to be a natural human tendency, this assigning judgment based on first impressions. And that tendency gets further shaped and reinforced by, a lifetime of conditioning by schools, religious institutions, our families, the media, all those inputs.
Wow, okay. And the impact of this is not just about an offered social moment or a bad gut feeling, right? This scales up quite significantly.
It really does. The consequences of bias are incredibly far-reaching. They affect us as individuals, and they affect society as a whole.
How so on a personal level?
Well, personally, biases can negatively impact someone's personal and professional relationships. They can distort how we see things, leading to poor choices, maybe an inability to listen to opposing views, which is huge.
Yeah, shutting down.
And generally fostering a limited or distorted way of thinking. It can really narrow your world,
And then zooming out, looking at the bigger picture. How does this play out in society?
Well, when these individual biases become widespread, they don't just stay individual. They can aggregate, become deeply embedded within organizational structures, policies, even broader cultural norms.
So they become systemic.
Exactly. The report points to how this can contribute to serious systemic issues, things like racial disparities in police shootings or the stubborn persistence of the gender pay gap.
Wow.
This is how individual cognitive tendencies, these mental shortcuts, can evolve into really pervasive societal challenges. And sometimes, historically, with devastating consequences, the report mentions examples like the Holocaust and slavery.
Okay, so this is huge. Let's try to unpack this a bit more. Our brains are these incredible, complex machines. How do these biases actually work inside our minds? What are the psychological mechanisms that create these shortcuts?
Yeah, that's the fascinating part. The report explains that biases stem from this really complex interplay of psychological factors, things like attention, perception, memory, motivation, and crucially, emotions.
The building blocks.
They're the fundamental building blocks of these cognitive shortcuts. And sometimes, well, they can go a bit awry.
Okay, so let's start with how we pay attention and perceive the world. You said our brains can't possibly take everything in.
That's absolutely right. The human brain is inherently designed for selective attention. It has to be. It focuses on certain stimuli while actively filtering out others.
For efficiency? Yeah.
Efficiency, yeah. Crucial for managing just an overwhelming amount of sensory information, but this very efficiency can give rise to biases.
How so?
Well, one key example is the availability heuristic. This is our tendency to overestimate the importance of information that readily comes to mind.
Readily comes to mind. Because it's recent or dramatic.
Exactly. Because it's vivid or recent or just easily recalled for some reason.
Like, maybe after a big news report about a plane crash, you suddenly feel like flying is way riskier, even if, statistically it's incredibly safe. That image is just so strong.
That's a perfect example. The vividness makes it available. Or why, say, insurance rates might spike right after a major natural disaster. The risk feels much higher because the event is fresh in everyone's mind.
Right. It's front and center.
And our brains latch onto what's readily available. Now, this tendency is often, shall we say, amplified by confirmation bias.
Ah, yes, confirmation bias. Seeking out stuff that confirms what we already think.
Precisely. We actively seek out information that confirms our pre-existing beliefs, and just as importantly, we tend to disregard or downplay contradictory evidence.
So if I say, only watch news channels that align with my political views, that's confirmation bias in action. I'm basically building my own little echo chamber.
You absolutely are. And what's really interesting here is that this isn't just a passive thing. Our motivations play a huge role, too. This leads us to something called motivated reasoning.
Motivated reasoning.
Okay.
Okay.
What's that? It's when we want a particular outcome or conclusion to be true. When that happens, we tend to selectively process information to support our desired conclusion.
Oh, wow. So we cherry pick the evidence that fits what we want to believe.
Essentially, yes. It can lead to a genuinely distorted view of reality because we give much more weight to information that aligns with our goals or preferences. And the tricky part is it often feels like we're reasoning objectively, but we're actually bending the process to fit our desires.
That makes a scary amount of sense.
Yeah.
And emotions, too. I know my feelings can totally warp my perspective and decisions sometimes.
Oh, they absolutely can. The effect heuristic is a prime example. It shows how our judgments are influenced by our emotional state.
How does that work?
Well, for instance, if you're feeling anxious about something, maybe a job interview or a presentation, you might perceive the risks involved, like failing or making a fool of yourself, as significantly higher than they objectively are. Your anxiety colors your judgment.
Right, fear goggles on.
Exactly. And similarly, there's the loss aversion bias. This highlights a really fundamental human trait. The fear of loss is more significant than the pleasure of gain.
We hate losing more than we like winning.
Pretty much. This often makes us incredibly risk-averse. We might prefer to avoid even a small potential loss, even if doing so means missing out on a potentially much larger gain. The fear of losing looms larger.
Okay, so that covers a lot about how our individual minds kind of trip us up. But what about how we see and categorize other people? That feels like where social biases really come into play and cause big problems in the real world.
Yes, absolutely. And it all starts with a very fundamental cognitive process, categorization. Our brains are incredibly efficient at organizing information. They essentially act as categorizing machines to help us make sense of the world by grouping similar things together.
That sounds useful generally. Like knowing chairs are for sitting, dogs bark.
It is useful, highly adaptive for organizing vast amounts of information quickly. But this same mechanism becomes a source of bias when it leads to stereotyping.
Right, which is when we start attributing certain characteristics to an entire group based on our interactions with maybe just a few members. It's a huge oversimplification, isn't it?
It really is. It completely oversimplifies the complexities of individual differences. It ignores the person and just sees the category label.
And then there are attribution biases about how we explain why people do things.
Yes, how we attribute causes to behavior. A big one is the fundamental attribution error, often called FAE. This happens when we're observing others. We tend to overestimate the role of personality, their internal traits, and underestimate the impact of situational factors in shaping their behavior.
Okay, give me an example.
So, if you see someone cut you off in traffic, your immediate thought might be, wow, what a jerk, such a bad driver. That's attributing it to their personality.
Right.
You're less likely to consider situational factors like maybe they're rushing to an emergency, or perhaps they genuinely didn't see you due to a blind spot. You jump to the internal disposition.
Got it. We don't do that for ourselves, do we?
Ah, well, that leads perfectly into the actor-observer bias. It's a fascinating sort of twist on the FAE, like an internal mirror effect. It's our tendency to attribute our own behavior more to situational factors, but others' behavior more to their internal factors or personality.
Oh, I totally know this one. Like, if I'm late for a meeting, it's definitely because the traffic was unexpectedly horrendous. But if my colleague is late,
then clearly they're just lazy and incompetent.
Exactly. It wasn't the traffic for them. Oh, no.
Precisely. This asymmetry helps us maintain a positive self-image, perhaps, but it can really hinder objective self-assessment and understanding others' situations.
Yeah, I could see that.
And when we look at how these categorizations play out socially, we run into concepts like implicit bias. This is that unconscious preference or aversion towards a group or an individual.
The stuff we don't even know we're doing.
Right. And the report mentions some powerful studies showing its real-world impact. For instance, research where hiring managers unconsciously skipped resumes with African-American sounding names or showed a clear preference for Anglo-sounding names, even when the qualifications were identical.
That's deeply concerning.
It is. And this connects to broader issues like ageism. And as mentioned before, it's cited as a potential factor in things like racial disparities in police shootings.
And what about affinity bias? Liking people who are like us.
That's another really common one, sometimes called similarity bias. We unconsciously favor people who share similar characteristics with us, background, interests, maybe even appearance.
So in hiring
Managers might unconsciously gravitate towards candidates from their same university or people in their age group. Even the common goal of achieving a good culture fit, while well-intentioned, can inadvertently lead to very homogeneous workplaces if affinity bias isn't checked. It can stifle diversity and innovation.
Wow. Okay, this all sounds so deeply embedded in how we think and interact. What about memory? Our memories feel so real, so solid, but do they play tricks on us too in terms of bias?
Oh, absolutely. Memory is far from being like a perfect video recording. The report makes it clear that memory actively reconstructs past events. It's not just retrieval, it's reconstruction. And that makes it highly susceptible to systematic distortions.
Like what kind of distortions?
Well, the memory congruency effect is particularly relevant here. It describes our enhanced ability to remember new information that aligns with what is already known.
So it's easier to remember stuff that fits with what we already believe.
Essentially, yes. It's like our brains have a built-in filter that favors consistency. Congruent information is more easily integrated into existing mental frameworks or schemas.
Huh. So our brains are basically optimized to prefer information that confirms what we already think, and that makes it stick better in our memory.
That's a good way to put it. It's like a confirmation bias, specifically for memory encoding and retrieval. The report notes our brains are truly optimized to favor what is already known or believed. Neurologically, it seems the brain streamlines the processing of information that confirms existing knowledge. It feels smoother, more natural to integrate.
And I bet that creates a significant cognitive cost when we actually try to challenge those existing beliefs or learn something contradictory.
You hit the nail on the head. This inherent prioritization of coherence makes learning new contradictory information or changing one's mind particularly challenging. It takes real cognitive effort.
It requires pushing back against the brain's preferred state.
Exactly. It highlights the cognitive cost of deeply rooted mental shortcuts. We have to consciously overcome a system that's designed in a way to prioritize consistency and familiarity. It really is like trying to swim upstream against your own brain's natural current.
Okay, wow. So we've talked about what biases are, how they work inside our heads, these sort of efficient but sometimes misleading shortcuts. Now, let's get concrete. Let's see them in action. Because these biases, they show up everywhere, right? Influencing decisions in our personal lives, professional settings, society, sometimes in ways we don't even recognize.
Absolutely. And what's fascinating, or perhaps a bit unsettling, is how often we encounter these, maybe without even putting a name to it. Take the Dunning-Kruger effect, for example.
Ah, the Dunning-Kruger effect. I think I've heard of this one. Isn't it about people who aren't very good at something thinking they're great at it?
That's the gist, yes. The report describes it as individuals with limited knowledge or competence tend to overestimate their abilities.
Right. I can totally see this playing out. The report mentions examples, like medical students predicting much higher grades than they actually get.
Or think about poor performers in a workplace who might strongly resist constructive criticism. It's not just denial. They often genuinely lack the metacognitive ability, the ability to think about their own thinking, to recognize their own incompetence.
So they don't know what they don't know.
Exactly. It's that double burden, as the researchers called it. Those who are least competent also lack the self-awareness needed to realize it, which makes improvement incredibly difficult.
Oof. Okay, what else?
Then there's the framing effect. This is all about how decisions are influenced by how information is presented, not just the objective facts themselves. The frame matters.
Okay, like how saying ground beef is 80% lean sounds way healthier and more appealing than saying it's 20% fat, even though it's the exact same product.
Perfect example. The positive frame, lean, is more attractive than the negative frame, fat. Or think about a gym membership presenting the cost as just $1.37 per day. Sounds much more manageable and appealing than $500 per year, right? Even though it's the same total amount.
Yeah, the daily cost feels tiny. Sneaky.
It leverages how we perceive value. And another really common one is the anchoring bias. This is our tendency to over-rely on the very first piece of information we encounter when making decisions.
The anchor.
Right. So imagine you're shopping. A shop might display a very expensive item first, say a $100 pair of earrings. That high initial price acts as an anchor. Then a $75 necklace shown next might seem like a steal in comparison.
Even if $75 is still more than you originally planned to spend on a necklace.
Precisely. The initial anchor shifted your perception of value. Or think about salary negotiations.
Oh yeah, the first number mentioned.
Often sets the entire tone and range for the discussion, even if that first number was somewhat arbitrary. It anchors the negotiation.
Okay. These are definitely things I recognize. Now, you mentioned earlier the importance of clarifying some terms that often get tangled up. Stereotypes, prejudice, and microaggressions. This feels really crucial, especially with how much we hear these terms today. What's the precise difference?
It's a really important distinction, and the report lays it out clearly. A stereotype is primarily an oversimplified cognitive belief about a particular group of people. It's a thought, a generalization.
Like the belief that, I don't know, all engineers are introverted or all artists are disorganized.
Exactly. These are mental shortcuts for categorization. They're often learned and reinforced, maybe through popular media or viewpoints passed down by parents, peers, and so on. It's a belief system.
Okay, so it's a cognitive belief,
yeah,
a thought pattern. Then prejudice. That adds an emotional layer.
Yes, that's a key difference. Prejudice is a preconceived, usually unfounded, negative opinion or attitude towards a group or its members. It's often deeply emotional, based solely on their group membership, not on actual experience or reason.
So it's holding irrational, negative thoughts about someone based on their age, race, gender, that kind of thing.
Right. Think of it this way. The stereotype provides the cognitive foundation, the oversimplified belief. Group X is like this. Prejudice then adds the negative sentiment, the dislike, the fear, the feelings and emotions directed at that group based on the stereotype.
Okay, belief plus negative feeling. And microaggressions then are how these things actually show up in interactions.
That's a great way to summarize it. Microaggressions are the subtle, often everyday verbal, nonverbal, or environmental slights, snubs, or insults, which may be intentional or unintentional, that communicate hostile, derogatory, or negative messages to target persons based solely upon their marginalized group membership.
Subtle. So maybe the person doing it doesn't even realize.
Often, yes. That's part of what makes them insidious. Examples might include a racial microaggression, like telling an Asian American colleague, "Wow, you speak good English," which implies they aren't seen as truly American.
Right. The compliment isn't really a compliment.
Exactly. Or telling a young girl, "Oh, you don't need to worry about math or science," which is a gender microaggression reinforcing limiting stereotypes. Even common phrases like, "That's so gay," used to mean something is bad, functions as a microaggression against sexual orientation. They're small, daily paper cuts that add up.
Okay. Wow. Understanding these differences feels really important for actually addressing bias. But with all these different biases, cognitive, social, memory-based, it honestly feels a bit like we're fighting an uphill battle against our own brains. How can we possibly become more aware, let alone mitigate their influence? Is there any hope here?
There absolutely is hope, and that's really where the power of assessment and conscious effort comes in. The report emphasizes something key. An assessment focused on bias isn't about judging you personally, saying you're biased.
Okay, that's good to know.
Instead, it's about gauging your intellectual understanding of bias itself. It's designed as a pedagogical instrument, basically, a tool for learning and self-discovery, not a moral judgment.
So what does taking an assessment like that actually teach you? How does it help us tackle this complex thing?
Well, it helps in several really crucial ways. First, it helps you in recognizing bias, just being able to define it, distinguish between different types like implicit versus explicit.
Okay, naming it?
Second, it helps in identifying mechanisms, understanding the why behind bias, the roles of attention, memory, emotion, categorization, all the stuff we've been talking about.
Knowing how it works.
Third, analyzing impact. Seeing clearly how these biases actually affect judgments and decisions in the real world, both for individuals and for society. And crucially, fourth, it introduces you to applying mitigation strategies, learning concrete, actionable ways to reduce their influence.
And how does actually engaging with an assessment, maybe even seeing our own tendencies reflected back at us, how does that process help?
That engagement is powerful. The primary benefit is enhanced awareness and recognition. By making potentially unconscious biases more explicit, the assessment acts like a mirror for self-reflection.
Holding up a mirror.
Yeah. When you encounter a question or a scenario in an assessment that reflects a bias you might hold, even implicitly, it can trigger a moment of, maybe I do that. This is vital because, as we said, implicit biases are so hard to acknowledge precisely because they operate outside our conscious awareness.
So it helps us see what we couldn't see before. Kind of lifts the veil on our own blind spots.
Exactly that. And beyond just awareness, it deepens our understanding of the mechanisms at play. When you really grasp that biases aren't typically moral failings, but are often these inherent cognitive shortcuts stemming from that efficiency-accuracy trade-off, it sort of demystifies the whole phenomenon. It gives you an intellectual framework to understand why it happens, and that empowers you to anticipate when and how biases might arise in your own thinking, allowing for more proactive intervention rather than just reacting after the fact.
And I imagine it also promotes a lot of critical thinking, just about our own thought processes in general.
It really does. The whole process inherently encourages you to evaluate your own knowledge, thought processes, and identify gaps. For example, it can be a way to recognize the Dunning-Kruger effect in yourself. Maybe areas where you overestimate your own understanding or objectivity.
A bit humbling, perhaps.
Can be. But that self-assessment is critical for growth. Furthermore, it fosters critical thinking more broadly by requiring you to analyze scenarios, question your initial gut reactions, and consider alternative perspectives, thereby reducing the automatic, unthinking influence of biases.
Okay, so the awareness and understanding are key. What are those concrete strategies for mitigation? What are some practical things an assessment helps us learn and apply in our daily lives?
Great question. One really key strategy is actively seeking diverse perspectives.
Yeah.
Once you truly understand biases like confirmation bias or groupthink, it can motivate you to deliberately seek out different viewpoints, contradictory evidence, people who think differently. It's about consciously counteracting that natural tendency to stick with what's familiar or agreeable.
That makes sense. Break out of the echo chamber. What else?
Using structured decision-making processes. Instead of just going with your gut, especially for important decisions, using frameworks can help. The report mentions things like the 6 thinking hats method, where you systematically analyze information from different angles, facts, feelings, risks, benefits, creativity, process.
So it forces a more thorough, less biased evaluation.
Exactly. It slows down the automatic thinking. Mindfulness and emotional regulation are also highlighted as critical. Recognizing the profound impact of emotions on cognitive biases, remember the affect heuristic, loss aversion, understanding that connection can encourage you to pause, notice your emotional state, and create some space before strong emotions sway your judgment.
Taking a breath before reacting.
Essentially, yes.
Good.
And what about in professional settings like hiring or performance reviews? Bias can run rampant there.
Yeah, definitely. What helps there?
In contexts like hiring, standardizing processes is vital. Understanding how implicit bias and affinity bias operate can directly lead to implementing practices like anonymizing resumes, removing names and other identifying information initially, or using structured interviews with standardized questions for all candidates, maybe even using blind hiring software.
So taking the opportunity for bias out of the equation where possible.
Precisely. It directly counters that unconscious favoritism and promotes more equitable, merit-based outcomes. And finally, the report emphasizes fostering empathy. By illuminating how categorization can lead to oversimplified stereotypes and how social biases like prejudice and microaggressions genuinely impact others, an assessment can increase our sensitivity. It can encourage positive intergroup contact and help build more inclusive environments.
Okay, so if we try to recap this whole deep dive, biases are fundamentally inherent parts of how our brains work. They're these adaptive shortcuts that allow us to make sense of and navigate a really complex world quickly. They're kind of like a feature, not a bug in a way.
That's a great way to frame it, yeah. They serve a purpose. But as we've explored in detail, this efficiency often comes at the cost of accuracy. It leads to systematic errors in judgment. And these errors can have truly profound repercussions, both for us as individuals, distorting relationships, choices, and for society at large, contributing to systemic discrimination and inequality.
So understanding these complex psychological mechanisms, attention, memory, emotion, categorization, that's really the crucial first step.
Absolutely. And our mission here, or rather, the mission for anyone wanting to address bias, isn't really about eradicating biases entirely. That might actually be impossible given how deeply wired they are.
Right. It's not about becoming perfectly objective robot.
No, not at all. It's more about developing the cognitive tools and behavioral strategies to manage their influence. It's about awareness, understanding, and conscious effort. A robust assessment, when used as a learning tool, paired with ongoing self-reflection and the proactive strategies we discussed, can be an indispensable starting point in this continuous learning process.
Equipping us with the knowledge and critical self-awareness needed.
Exactly. Necessary to make more objective, more equitable, and ultimately more informed decisions in all aspects of life.
So thinking about all this,
Yeah.
what does it mean for you listening right now? Here's maybe a final thought to chew on. Given our brain's inherent tendency to favor what it already knows, that really powerful memory congruency effect we talked about, how much of what you currently believe is truly based on objective reality? And how much might simply be a comfortable, familiar echo of what you've always known or been told?
That's a challenging question.
It really is.
Yeah.
And maybe ask yourself, what's one small step you could take, maybe even today, to actively challenge just one of your own deeply held assumptions or beliefs? Just one small step towards navigating the world with a little more awareness.
This is DigitView.